Welcome to the 3DownNation podcast. I'm Justin Dunk, joined by John Hodge and JC Abbott. My man, Abbott, we give you a lot of guff or the business, whatever you want to call it. I feel like you're my younger brother and I give you noogies all the time. So, on the flip side of that, we should give you some credit because your piece after the BC Lions win that we'll get into a little bit later on comments coming out of BC's locker room about Vernon Adams Jr. was elite. So, well done. I'm still going to give you some noogies, but that piece was really great.
Well, I'm glad that you enjoyed it, Dunk, and I'm glad that it was worth something because I had white knuckling at the stadium, worrying I wasn't going to get home in the middle of the atmospheric river. I could hear the rain pounding on the roof of BC Place. I'm like, uh-oh, is the highway going to be washed out by the time I'm finishing this? Luckily, it was all good at that stage, but I couldn't tell while I was sitting there. I thought there might be a chance that I was going to have to sleep in the stands overnight.
Did you catch any salmon?
I did not, although I hear that if I went up to North Van, I could have reached into the streets and caught myself a nice coho.
Honestly, like with the way grocery prices are, I don't want to make light of, because we should acknowledge that like a lot of people lost a lot of property and stuff, which is a tragedy and that sucks. But I'm just saying for me personally, if there was salmon swimming in the streets with grocery prices the way they are now, I'd be out there with a net. Or heck, I'd be like one of those grizzly bears you see. I'd just be catching them with my big old mitt. Give me that protein. Give me those omega-3 fatty acids. If I'm losing property, I'm getting fish in return.
That's what I'm talking about. That brain power, baby, omega-3. All right, boys, we're going to discuss Vernon Adams Jr. shredding the Montreal Alouettes and whether it was meaningless or not.
The Redblacks' late-game surge in Toronto.
Levi Mitchell's 5-touchdown performance against his old team.
The Argos adding an intriguing NCAA Division III quarterback.
Ryan Reynolds trolling the Kelsey brothers about Canadian football superiority.
And the Tiger Cats retiring Garney Henley's number. But first,
the Toronto Argonauts dominated the Ottawa Redblacks for the first 3 quarters in Saturday's win over Ottawa, at one point leading 38-6. The Redblacks scored 25 unanswered points in the fourth quarter, however, to make it close. With the Argos clinching home field advantage in the East semifinal, did the Redblacks comeback make you think Ottawa can knock off the Boatmen when the two teams meet on Saturday, November 2nd?
Honestly, it did. And look, I want to make it clear. I'm going to be picking the Argos in that game, and I've had the Argos atop my ballot in the 3-down power rankings that we do each week for a while. And finally this week, I think everybody agreed with me because they moved from number 3 to number 1 on our list. So I am going to be picking Toronto for that game. However, at, let's say, midway point of the third quarter, the Argonauts go up 38-6. I'm sitting there going, wow, the East semifinal is going to be a blowout. You may as well skip it and just have the Argos visit the Alouettes for the East final, or maybe they could play like a home and home 2-game series like they used to do way back in the day in the CFL. But the fact that the Ottawa Redblacks came back 2 onside kick recoveries, which were sensational. Shout out Lewis Ward for those kicks. Brilliant work by that team's special teams unit. I think the Redblacks have life here. And honestly, I know that they weren't able to come back and get the win. Fair enough. But when you look at the energy surrounding guys like Jovan Santos Knox, who I thought was a bit of a spark plug coming back for them at the middle linebacker spot, and some of the other things they were able to do, Drew Brown ending up, some of it against soft look zone defense late in the game, but still finding a way to throw 4 touchdown passes, the fighting, the scratching, and the clawing. I do think that despite the terrible start this past week, there are reasons for optimism in our nation. This team is not dead. They could have rolled over and waved the white flag. They decided not to. They kept fighting, and I think they deserve credit for that.
Yeah, I thought it was an extremely important quarter for that team to show that, hey, we've still got some gumption left in us, that we are not dead and buried after this 6-game losing streak. And it was remarkably impressive. You mentioned Drew Brown there. I think that is the key to playoff success for the Ottawa Redblacks, is if he can play at that level or higher and can do it for the entirety of a football game. I think that they can beat anybody in the playoffs because it comes down to quarterbacking. If you get a quarterback on a hot streak or a guy who's performing at a high level, that levels any playing field. That could cause any upset. Just ask the Montreal Alouettes from last year. It's not necessarily a statement that I think Drew Brown is in the upper echelon of CFL quarterbacks, but if he can play at that level, I think he can beat anybody. It's true. Now, we should say I'm not super concerned about the Argos either after this fourth quarter collapse. And I encourage any of our listeners to go and read our contributor Ben Grant's column on that exact topic on the website. He was not concerned about the fourth quarter collapse because, well, it was kind of fluky. You mentioned the two onside kicks there, Hodge. Ben had a fantastic number. I'm not sure where he got it, so perhaps take the statistical analysis with a grain of salt. But apparently the odds of converting two back-to-back onside kicks is 0.27%. That means if you were to attempt it every single game, you would convert it once every 20 seasons. If you did it just once a season, it would take you 370 years to do it again. That is an all-time fluke. It's not something you can rely upon to be able to put up these huge numbers in the fourth quarter. So Ottawa needs to clean that up, and Toronto doesn't necessarily need to be super scared about the way they performed in that last frame. They need to be aware of it. They need to correct those errors. But it's clear that they're still the better, more talented team overall.
For the Redblacks to have a legitimate shot at winning that game in the East semifinal, Ottawa has to find a way to run the football, at least even decently, because it's going to be a little bit colder, and it was clear that Argos front could just get after Drew Brown. I'm not saying he can't go out and throw for 300 or 400 yards like he did at BMO Field, on Saturday, again in the East semifinal. But ever since Raquel Armstead was released, for the reasons that the Redblacks want to lock up and throw away and never talk about, they have not been able to run the football anywhere near as good consistently as they did when Armstead was there. So for me, that's what I need to see from the Redblacks, because I do believe they can be competitive, and ultimately to win in the playoffs, you have to at least run the football to some degree. It can't be that small total that they produced on Saturday.
The other spot that I thought they really struggled with in Ottawa was that left tackle position. Drake Centers made his second start of the year at left tackle and was battling for his life. And that Toronto Argonauts defensive line deserves a big shout out. Right now, Jake Serezna and Ralph Hawley, the rookie, are tied for the CFL lead in sacks, which is wild given the fact that, first of all, they're both interior guys, not edge rushers, and the fact that they're teammates. Like, this team has gotten 16 sacks from the interior of their defensive line, which is brilliant. Kudos to them. But regardless, that unit absolutely gave the Redblacks fits. And if you're Tommy Condell, the Redblacks offensive coordinator, you need to go, okay, if Dino Boyd, who's missed the last 4 games for Ottawa, their usual left tackle, is not going to be available for the playoffs, we need to formulate a game plan that does not put Drake Centers on an island. Because if there is a repeat of that in the playoffs, the Argonauts are going to roll right over that offensive line. They need help. They need a tight end. They need to roll the pocket away from that spot. They need to have receivers cracking at the line of scrimmage. They need to do something. They need to do whatever they can, because you cannot put somebody in a position where it's like, hey, this is Forlan or Malade. You're going to go up against him 45 times, ISO'd. Good luck, kid. Like, that's just not going to work. So you need to find out something to do, because I thought that was a big part of the reason why the game got out of hand. And then, again, once the Argonauts called out the dogs a little bit late, that's when the Red Blacks offense started to kick in. So I agree with you, Dunk. I think running the ball is a great way to stop that defensive line from pinning their ears back. A good way to do that is get your fullbacks involved, whether it's Anthony Gosselin, Marc-Anne Dubois, or whoever, or heck, bring out Dante Bull, the first overall pick from last year's draft you haven't used at all, and plug him in at tight end and just ask him, hey, can you use your 330-pound body to go and hurt some people? Because this is physical playoff football. We need you to bear down. We need you to lead the pile. And I think he's capable of doing that. Vernon Adams Jr. tore it up in his return to the starting lineup, throwing for 385 yards, 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, one of which was not remotely his fault, in a 27-3 win over Montreal. How impressed were you with his performance, and what did you think about BC's chances in the West semifinal, considering it appears Adams Jr. will in fact be the starter at quarterback?
Well, it completely changes the dynamics of this team and their outlook going forward. I was wildly impressed with VA's performance, first of all. I thought he looked poised. I thought he looked decisive to a degree we just haven't seen lately from Nathan Rourke. The 2 interceptions, I think, is a fair commentary because although one of those was just a crazy bobble by Aiden Eberhardt, on the throw previous to that, Kabian Ento dropped a wide side out that would have been a 105-yard pick six had he held on to that ball. So I think it's a true 2 interceptions from Vernon Adams Jr. There was a couple of errors there, but overall his performance was incredible. But the more incredible thing was how his teammates seemed to respond to him. And you can see it right off the bat, guys, from that very first throw of the game when he goes deep 43 yards to Justin McInnes. McInnes battling back to that ball in bump and run coverage from Marc-Antoine Dequoy. We just haven't seen a receiver make a play like that in a long time for the BC Lions. And your instant thought was, okay, these guys are playing for VA right now. They're trying to make a statement with their performance. And guess what? They said as much after the game. I got a chance to talk to Keon Hatcher, and he said, look, we like Nathan. We love Nathan. He's a great guy. But this is VA's team. We're just glad to have number 3 back taking control of his team. And you saw that tonight. Like, that is as much saying the quiet part out loud as you possibly can. And Adams was emotional after the game. He was almost in tears when he was asked about the response of his teammates after everything he's been through this season, saying that they had his back. It's clear that this locker room wasn't divided necessarily by the quarterback change. They were on VA's side, and they were struggling with an identity after he wasn't given the chance to take his job back once he was healthy. I think VA felt betrayed. I think his receivers felt for him emotionally, and they showed it in this game once their guy was back under center that he's who they want throwing the rock to them.
JC, let me ask you a question. If Montreal had anything on the line, was playing full throttle, let's say, do you think Vernon Adams Jr. would have had a similar performance?
Yes, I do, only because the piece of context that is perhaps missed from this performance is Nathan Rourke's best performance of the season, arguably, was also against Montreal in a victory just a few weeks before. I think BC has their number. Now, do I think it would be much closer if there was something on the line? Absolutely. I think this blowout was much a factor of the circumstances as anything else. But VA's specific performance, I think that would have translated with the way he was playing. And I think the effort level of the receivers will have translated as well.
From my perspective, that's up for debate. And that's why I have a hard time getting fully behind Vernon Adams Jr. as the starter, especially for this West semifinal that the Lions are going to play against either the Riders or the Bombers. The odds would say it's likely Saskatchewan, but we'll see how things play out on the final Saturday of the regular season, because we don't know, how hard Montreal was going in this game. It didn't matter for them. Cody Fajardo, Davis Alexander, the defense, and the rest. So he's going to have to prove it at the most important time of the season. And that's a lot of pressure. I'm not saying Vernon Adams Jr. can't live up to it. I'm not discrediting the performance, because it did look like there was a renewed energy, let's say, around the team with what you were describing in terms of how the Lions were playing for Vernon Adams Jr. But I'm just sort of providing some balance here in the context to say, okay, Montreal didn't have anything on the line.
It's true they didn't have anything on the line. However, it's not like they sat the team, right? Like they gave Walter Fletcher the day off. Honestly, I don't think there's a huge drop-off from Walter Fletcher to Sean Thomas Erlington. And then they gave Austin Mack the day off. Everybody else, like they had some other healthy scratches, Reggie White Jr., Nafis Lyon, but these are all guys who have been healthy scratches earlier on in the year, even when the team had something to play for. And yes, they lost their starting right tackle, Josh Donovan, who's been great as a rookie, but the replacement for him was Jamar McCloster, who was the team's starting right tackle during their Grey Cup playoff run last year. So I agree that the Alouettes might not have been calling the game as tough as they normally would. It's possible that they didn't use that top gear that they have available. But Jason Moss being as intense and as competitive as he is, I don't think is the type of guy to say, hey guys, we just flew like 4,000 kilometers. Let's make sure we don't bring our A game today. If there's a play that you can make, well,
it's
fair
just
enough.
The fact that I don't think the Alouettes are playing with that edge, right? It's not Cody Fajardo before Grey Cup speech level type stuff.
Well, maybe he has to make another speech like that, because this team is going to be playing a very motivated Winnipeg Blue Bombers team. And the Alouettes came into Princess Auto, kicked the snot out of Winnipeg in week 1. Now, that was a very long time ago. But if you're the Alouettes, this team has not been great. I'm sorry to say, they've not been very good over the last 5 weeks. Like in their last 6 games, they've got 2 wins, 3 losses, and a tie. 2 of those losses are to BC, as JC pointed out. One is to the Argos. That was a respectful loss, but like this team has not been terribly sharp. The tie was against Calgary. How do you not beat Calgary? To me, if you're the Alouettes, this upcoming week, I'm not going to call it a must win, but it's a must compete. Like you have to look good, because they're going to have a bye, obviously, first week of the playoffs. By virtue of finishing atop the East Division, they've got to start cooking for the playoffs, in my mind, to thwart any risk of coming out flat in that East final. But to get back to the original question, I thought VA looked great. I've been saying for weeks that Nathan Rourke is the future, but VA is the right now. This offseason, this team is going to have a chance, and I still don't think this team is going to move on from Nathan Rourke. I still think that they're going to trade VA, and Nathan Rourke is the future. But this offseason, this team is going to have an opportunity to do a reset. This team is going to have an opportunity to shift things around, right, and give a new identity, give a new purpose, so to speak. This was always VA's team. He was tasked with the goal of getting them to a home Grey Cup game, and I'm thrilled that he is getting the opportunity to do that. No disrespect to Nathan Rourke, but I fully 100% agree with what JC posited as his own observations from the game, which was, holy smokes, these guys are playing on a new level right now. And kudos to Keon Hatcher for not being afraid to state an honest opinion post-game, which was, what you saw out there is 100% what we're feeling. This is VA's team. We're going to battle for him.
Yeah, and VA took steps into the week to make that happen and renew that energy. He took the entire offensive side early in the week once he knew he was getting the start, and they watched the last game film, and he called out all his receivers. He said, when Lucky Whitehead and Dominic Rhymes were here in this room, we used to celebrate. We used to get hyped after catches and first downs. We used to plan things. Where has that been this year? Why does it look like we're going through the motions? And he demanded that that group celebrate. So if you watch that game again, every first down, every touchdown, there's something going on. That energy was back. They were having fun again. That's because VA brought it out of them. That's because right now, he's the leader of that team, and he always has been. It's been a real awkward situation trying to bounce back and forth, as we've talked about before, between him and Nathan, not knowing where to look. It's clear that spiritually, just from the sense that he's been there for the last 2 years, he was with them in training camp. He was flying guys down for mini camp workouts, that they see VA as their guy. And I think everyone is, as much as I love Nathan, somewhat justified in being upset with the way this was handled, just based on the fact that VA was having what could very well have been an M.O.P season, right? And he will always, as he looks back on his career, have to grapple with that. Was that taken away from me? Was that opportunity to get that accomplishment
pro
for
football,
myself
man.
and my team?
Don't get hurt,
Hey,
stay on the field.
I mean, fair enough commentary, but he would have been on the field. He would have probably missed 2 games.
He would have been
had
a
it
lot
not
sooner.
been for,
Yes.
Yeah, he would be back on the field much sooner.
He's
He
been
would have
healthy on
had-
the bench for 6 weeks.
Watching somebody else, as much as I love Nathan, struggle, well, the guys around him clearly didn't respond to him. So I think Nathan's the future for this organization, but it's pretty clear that this was not handled the way it needed to have been handled for the entire team to get on board.
Then how should it have been handled?
I think you can make it. I think you need to think long and hard about whether Nathan should have been brought in at this stage at all. But if you were going to do it, I think you needed to give VA the opportunity to get his job back once he was healthy, just like you did for Nathan when he was having his historic start to the year and suffered the Liz Frank. I think there's a lot of parallels there, and the guys see it, right? In that circumstance, VA was brought in midseason. He did basically what Nathan has done this year, which is look okay at times, have a flash here, have a flash there, but struggle, not have his eyes right, be just okay. And then as soon as Rourke was healthy, they went back to him for the playoffs under that circumstance. Here, that didn't happen when Rourke was struggling. They didn't go back to VA as soon as he was available like they went back to Nathan. I think that's what you have to do to keep the room. And then if VA gets the opportunity and struggles, I think everyone's on board with going back to Nathan because people reward performance and they expect excellence and they like both guys. But when you have that what if of a guy who's not given that opportunity, that's what eats at a team.
And I'll throw this in there too, because I think this changes the picture a little bit. Jake Dolegala loses in Edmonton on August 11th. Rourke signs 2 days later, starts at home against Winnipeg 5 days after that. And I don't think that's a bad decision because it's clear this team had no confidence in Jake Dolegala whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think that throwing Nathan Rourke to the dogs against Winnipeg was a great idea. Winnipeg, arguably the best defense in the CFL, but you don't have much of a choice. Again, if you don't believe in Jake Dolegala, sure, you throw Nathan out there. The next game, they go to Ottawa, lose by a touchdown. VA is probably getting to the point he can come back, but week 13, August 31st, they're playing in Victoria, Nathan's hometown. You're not taking the Victoria kid out when, let's say, Vernon Adams Jr. is maybe 95%, when you're playing in Victoria. And guess what? They win 38-12, beat the doors off the Redblacks, and all of a sudden, I can see from Rick Campbell's perspective going, well, we can't take him out now. Sure enough, they go in the next week, beat Montreal by 14 points, and I think that's why Nathan Rourke got 4 more starts. So I understand it. That being said, I think probably the best situation for the Lions, in hindsight, would have been to go back to VA much sooner. I said as much, but I also appreciate with the Touchdown Pacific game being where it was geographically and where it was chronologically, I think that certainly played a role in why he stayed in the lineup so long.
Bo Levi Mitchell lit up his former team this week, passing for 450 yards, 5 touchdowns, and just 1 interception in a 42-20 win over Calgary. The veteran passer admitted post-game how good it felt to beat the Stampeders. Following his performance, where does Bo sit on your M.O.P ballot?
This is so tricky because the Tiger Cats didn't make the playoffs, but the award is named Most Outstanding Player. He has had an outstanding season. I do believe he should be the East Division nominee for the Most Outstanding Player award because this is the way that it's currently structured. Hodge, though, I'm with you. I think we need a new way to do it. If it was the way that Hodge would like to do it in terms of just voting for the best players in these categories, then I honestly think Levi Mitchell would be third. If his team made the playoffs, I legitimately think he's in the conversation. But right now, Mitchell is third for me. Yes, I knew he threw for 5,000 yards, but his team didn't get into the playoffs. To me, it's a two-player race between Canadian running back Brady Oliveira and American defensive back Roland Milligan Jr. with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. At the moment, to be transparent, I'm a voter, as is Hodge. I'm leaning towards Milligan Jr. because his numbers, not just the interceptions, are unbelievable. We're talking about a guy that's right up there among the league leaders in special teams tackles. He's 2 behind now, Jack Cassar, and tied with his teammate A.J. Allen at 20. Cassar has 22. And he's up there among the league leaders in defensive plays made, where no other defensive back is even close. Yes, including your boy, Terrell Ford in Winnipeg, JC. The rest of the guys in that category are linebackers. Depending on what happens in the final week of the season, that could sway me. But I think right now I'm leaning towards Roland Milligan Jr., even though people out there trying to sway my vote, Hodge, out here trying to interfere in this thing.
Hey, I'm not trying to interfere with nothing. Your vote is your vote.
I'm not saying you are. I'm saying people out there in the world.
People. Okay, so unnamed people who are not me. Well, that leaves about 8 billion other people to choose from, I guess. But look,
you think there's 8 billion CFL fans out there talking about who's going to be the
You
M.O.P?
didn't say CFL fans. You said people. I was just going by the number of people. Though, hey, give Randy Ambrosie's global program a couple more years. Maybe we will have 8 billion CFL fans worldwide. Indonesia,
that thing's done and dusted.
What's up? Poland,
we do
have
people coming on the site from Indonesia. Shout out
Ball. I think those are VPNs, but I could be wrong. Maybe we'll. Hey, Chile. We'll get Chile. Kazakhstan. What's up, Kazakhstan? Let's go. Watch some CFL. But
how about
anyway.
Australia? Yo, real quick. There is a caller every post-game show on CKRM, Mark, who calls in from Australia. He watches every Riders game from the land down under.
That's cool.
There you go.
And maybe he'll talk to his friends in Tanzania or Bangladesh, and we'll get, again, more people watching. Who knows? But getting back to the matter at hand here, this performance from Levi Mitchell, first of all, kudos to him for having it. Second of all, kudos to him for, again, answering honestly post-game and being like, yeah, it felt great to beat the doors off my old team. He could have taken the high road and lied, but let's be honest, I'm sure I would have been feeling the exact same way if it were me, blasting the doors off my old team, so credit to him. That being said, this performance, I do think, has shifted the M.O.P. narrative, because I think Bo, with his terrible performance in Winnipeg, when the Ticats were, or pardon me, not against Winnipeg, the previous week, when the Ticats were eliminated from postseason contention, I thought, it probably takes his name off the ballot, so to speak. Now I'm not so sure. 5,000 yards, 31 touchdowns, 17 picks. Players have won this award with stat lines that look just like that, or are arguably a little bit worse. Now, should the stat line be the only thing that matters? Personally, I think that probably more than just the stats need to be taken into account. I also think, should be noted, 10 of his touchdown passes came in blowout wins over Edmonton and Calgary, in 2 of the worst defensive performances I think I've ever seen in my natural-born life. But that being said, it was still very impressive. He could still be the East Division nominee, and in fact, I think he will be the East Division nominee. The only question I have, and Roland Milligan, I've got the numbers here, 91 total tackles, 8 picks, obviously great season. Tyrese Beverette in Montreal, who plays on a better defense, has 107 total tackles, 4 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, 2 picks. So that's 6 turnover-worthy plays, plus 4 sacks, plus more tackles than Roland Milligan has. So my question for Roland Milligan voters, and I'm posing it to you right now, Dunk, why is Roland Milligan the M.O.P. if Tyrese Beverett doesn't even deserve consideration?
I'm not saying that he doesn't deserve consideration. It's just I don't feel like he's going to get out of the East Division, and I would push back and argue what you're basing the Alouettes being the best defense in the CFL, because you just said a few minutes ago that arguably the Blue Bombers are, and I would argue that the Riders, who are up there in a couple of very important statistical categories, namely turnovers forced, they lead the league by a mile, 47, and they're number one against the run. So when we're talking about this discussion, I can understand Tyrese Beverett being in the conversation, but I believe Roland Milligan Jr. has impacted two phases of the football game to a higher level than Beverett has impacted one. All due respect to his great season.
And let's also be clear, Beverett's a linebacker and Milligan is a halfback, right? Like, the expectations in terms of stats and what you're able to put up are very different for those two positions.
Yeah, well,
Milligan is putting up unusual numbers for a DB. Beverett is having a tremendous linebacker season. Certainly, he'll be an all CFL selection on my ballot, and I think a worthy M.O.P. nominee for the Alouettes, but they're not out of this world numbers for a linebacker, right? They're not special Solomon Elamimian record-setting type season numbers. They are fairly standard linebacker numbers.
I don't think they're fairly standard. And I also think that Tyrese Beverett plays a ton back in coverage. This is a guy who's only 208 pounds, has started games at safety for the Alouettes. But fair enough. Obviously, what Roland Milligan has done is sensational.
Every year, there's a handful of linebackers that have 100 tackles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but not necessarily with...
That's what JC's saying.
True.
I understand the rest of it, but like if you look at the top linebackers in the league every year, like, you know, one recall Jasper Simmons, and he have one great year, flash,
yeah,
and
he
then
did.
he was gone. I'm
Micah
not saying
Alway
Tyrese Beverett is a flash in the pan, but yeah, Micah Alway, like, I don't want to use it against Beverett, but the stat that jumps out most to me is the fact that Roland Milligan Jr. is even close to Tyrese Beverett in the category that the CFL calls defensive plays or total defensive plays. And he plays halfback. Like, it's unbelievable. I know he's on the boundary side. I hate calling it the weak side. Let's call it the boundary side, please. And he's still somewhat close to the football there. But to JC's point, what he's doing from that position is rare. Corey Mace has said it. Trevor Harris called Roland Milligan Jr. the best halfback that he's seen in his 12 seasons in the Canadian Football League. Yes, Harris is Roland Milligan Jr.'s teammate, but he doesn't just throw around praise like that all the time.
For the record, Winnipeg is number one in offensive points allowed and net offense allowed. Montreal is number 2 in offensive points allowed.
Is this going into last week or after?
This is through week 19, but Winnipeg and Saskatchewan did not play this past week. So we don't have Montreal's updated stats, but we do have Winnipeg and Saskatchewan up to date. Montreal is second in offensive points allowed. They're actually 5th in net defense. Saskatchewan is 3rd in both categories. So all very good defenses.
You said Montreal was the best.
I said they were arguably the best, and they certainly are arguably the best. I think Winnipeg is arguably the best, and I think Saskatchewan is arguably the best.
Only one can be the best, Hodge. Stop sitting on the fence.
I said 3 can arguably be the best.
The Toronto Argonauts are over here like, does our defensive line and linebacking core count for nothing? Like, how many more 7-sack games do we have to put up before you give us some respect, Hodge?
I mean, fair. I was beating the drum for Toronto earlier in the year, and then they were mediocre until the last third of the season. Now, injuries had a lot to do with that. Jake Srezda missed a little bit of time. Wynton McManus missed a lot of time. I get that. Right now, yes, I think Toronto's defense is playing sensational football. And actually, let's go by this. My favorite statistic for defense is opponent yards per play, which the CFL puts out every week. This takes into account how much defenses are on the field, because, of course, if one defense is on the field all the time and another defense is rarely on the field, then that can really skew just net yards allowed. So the number one defense in the league in terms of opponent yards per play is Montreal, Number 2 is Ottawa. Number 3 is Winnipeg. Number 4 is Toronto. And number 5 is Saskatchewan. Now, that's through, again, week 19. Those numbers could have changed slightly. By the way, Calgary and Edmonton are giving up over half a yard more per play than any other team in the league. I think that's a big part of the reason why they are out of the playoffs. Hamilton is 7th. They're also missing the playoffs. So this is, I think, a good statistic to judge defenses on, especially considering that the 6 playoff teams are the top 6 of this stat, and the bottom 3 teams are the 3 non-playoff teams. But regardless, my M.O.P. right now is still Brady Oliveira. And I think part of it is the fact that he missed out on this award last year. One could argue that that shouldn't come into play. For me, it does.
Shouldn't.
He's got 1,300 yards rushing, 400 yards receiving. That being said, I do think that week 21 is going to matter a lot for Brady Oliveira, because if Winnipeg loses that game, gets second place in the West, and all of a sudden, he puts up, let's say, 30 yards and fumbles, he's going to have a really hard time to make a case for M.O.P. If they go out there, he puts up 150 yards from scrimmage, 2 touchdowns, and they clinch first place in the West Division, I think he walks to the M.O.P. award. So this upcoming week, I think we'll have a lot to play for Brady Oliveira, and it's going to be tough, again, with Montreal having arguably the best defense in the CFL.
Every defense in the CFL has arguably the best defense, signed John Hodge.
Nobody is arguing that Calgary or Edmonton have good defenses. That is not true.
You do bring up a good point, though, my man, as much as I'm banging on you right now, that this week 21 is going to matter in the minds of a lot of voters, because if the Blue Bombers win and Oliveira is likely to have an impact in that and get first place in the West Division, then I do think his path to coming out of the West, which is essentially, I don't want to say this like I'm a division guy or whatever, but whoever comes out of the West as the M.O.P. is essentially going to win the league's M.O.P. award.
Likely.
So if Winnipeg is first place, probably going to be Brady Oliveira. If the Bombers lose, though, and Brady Oliveira gets stuffed in Montreal by your boy Tyrese Beverette and his defense, and the Riders go out and win, and Roland Milligan Jr. Racks up a couple special teams tackles and finishes the year tied for first in that category and has a pick, or puts out a bunch of tackles, has an impactful play here and there, then I think there's going to be some steam behind him. So this week 21 is paramount for reasons more important than just individual awards, though.
Yeah, and I think it matters in terms of when I look at my ballot for outstanding, most outstanding, I have to compare the player to their peers. For someone to be outstanding, they have to be head and shoulders above the other guys doing what they do. And that's my argument against Brady Oliveira this year. I think he is the best running back in the CFL, bar none. I think he's had a fantastic season. But, yards from scrimmage-wise, he's 200 yards above William Stanback right now. Now, if he has another 150 yards from scrimmage in this game, it becomes a much more compelling case in my mind. But to your point, Hodge, if he struggles, right, you're going, okay, well, if he's that close to Stanback, maybe he's not as outstanding as someone like Levi Mitchell, who is 1,000 yards ahead of the next best quarterback right now. That is, I don't think we've ever seen a gap that big in terms of 1 versus 2 in the passing leaguers category. That's absolutely absurd. Or someone like Roland Milligan Jr., whose statistics are just head and shoulders above the next closest DB. I think that sort of breadth from the next guy on the list matters when you're evaluating how outstanding a guy is. And while I love Oliveira, and I think he is the engine that makes that team run in Winnipeg, I don't think he has been as far removed from the next best guy as the other 2 candidates we've talked about has been.
Do we think, fellas, that it matters in the minds of the voters that, let's say, for example, Brady Oliveira is going to win the most outstanding Canadian award, okay? Do you think they go, well, Brady's going to get this award, do we vote for somebody else in the M.O.P? I'm not saying they're going to do that, because you can make a similar argument for Roland Milligan Jr., because it seems like to me that he would be able to win the most outstanding defensive player award in a walk, although, as Hodges laid out, perhaps Tyrese Beverette can be a factor in that. But sometimes that plays into this too, especially at the team level. I don't think it necessarily happens at the division or the league level, but it definitely does happen at the team level.
I think absolutely that plays into it a little bit. And I think just anecdotally, look at what happened last year, right? Where we had a bunch of candidates vying for multiple awards, but then you see Chad Kelly get the M.O.P, Brady get the M.O.C, and then Matthew Betts get the M.O.D.P. Not that any of those guys were unworthy of any of those awards, but it's interesting that they slot nicely into those categories to make sure that everyone was recognized. I do think there is a segment of voters that thinks about it strategically in that way to try and recognize the most guys that doesn't like people double dipping.
It shouldn't be like that, though. The
No,
category
should.
is most outstanding player. Who do you believe was the M.O.P? Most outstanding defensive player, most outstanding lineman, most outstanding Canadian, most outstanding rookie, whatever it is, should just be in that category. And, for the record, I think we've all agreed on this. Brady Oliveira was the most outstanding player in the 2023 CFL season, bar none. That is an injustice that you can't go back and fix. But I do think, as Hodge alluded to, some voters will want to try to make up for that in 2024. Not to say he hasn't been outstanding, but I think when you look at Roland Milligan Jr., JC, you touched on this, compared to his peers, he is head and shoulders, knees and toes above the rest at his position and potentially even with his impact on defense.
Well, and this is something I've written before in a column, and I've had people from the league, or at least people involved in their award show, say to me, hey, this is a great idea. Maybe we should do this. Where instead of having an East Division nominee and a West Division nominee for the awards, you just have three, regardless of division, because that is a challenge you have on awards night where, okay, there's two people up for this award, and it's abundantly obvious between the two of them who's going to win it, right? Like, I remember being in the lockdown room in Regina, and it's like, oh, I wonder who the rookie of the year is. Is it going to be Dalton Schoen with his, whatever it was, 1,400 yards and 16 touchdowns? Or is it going to be Tyson Philpott, who started 9 games? Like it's obvious. And like, I think Tyson Philpott got 1 vote, which was like, okay, I guess somebody just had to be
from Montreal.
Well, I was going to say that somebody has to be the contrarian who's like, no, I'm the smartest one in the room, and I've looked at the film, and Tyson Philpott was way better, and I'm at whatever. But the point is, I think that the most compelling awards show vote would be if the finalists for this year's M.O.P. were Bo Levi Mitchell, Brady Oliveira, and Roland Milligan Jr. So you've got 1 offensive player, you've got 2 defensive players, you've got 1 East Division, 2 West Division. You could argue, well, maybe the West vote
Hold on. 2 offensive players. You said 2 defensive players.
Oh, pardon me, 2 offensive players.
You just didn't include your boy Tyrese Beverette in there.
I'm just saying hypothetically.
You don't have to limit it to 3. You could have 4 or 5 depending on the year, kind of like the Heisman Trophy.
You could, and you could even do like a first round of voting where you do a ranked ballot, and anybody who reaches a certain threshold, like, yes, there's ways to do it. I'm just saying, if it were to be 3, and let's say hypothetically it were those 3, you could say, well, maybe Brady and Bo split the offensive vote, and that benefits Roland Milligan. Maybe Bo and Roland Milligan split the American vote, and Brady gets some more love for being Canadian. Maybe Roland Milligan and Brady Oliveira split the West Division vote, and that gives Bo Levi Mitchell a little bit more of an advantage. Like, and there's a compelling conversation, and tuning into awards night, people are like, whoa, these are 3 really good candidates. Wonder who's going to win, right? As opposed to when there's only 2, there's less factors at play, and it's less exciting, right? It's less exciting for me as a voter to cast for between just 2 people, and I think it's less exciting for people in the audience, especially like we talked about most outstanding Canadian. To me, if you had 3 people up for this award, one of them would be Brady Oliveira, one of them would be Tyrell Ford, and those 2 cannot currently even be finalists across the league because they play for the same team. So that fixes that problem too. Justin McInnis should be, I think those would be the 3, right? And only one of them is going to be a candidate, which I don't think is reasonable. So to me, I think that you could fix problems. I think that you could have a more compelling award site. if you just tweak the rule, because as it is, it's not as exciting with just 2. Montreal Alouettes struggled on the West Coast as Cody Fajardo and Davis Alexander failed to impress under center. Should the Owls be concerned with how badly the team played in Vancouver?
They absolutely should be concerned right now with the way that they are playing. And I'm going to go to a line that our contributor Pablo Herrera Vergara included in his article. He stole it from the Hall of Fame offensive lineman Pierre Vercheval, who now does commentating on RDS. But he said, right now, you don't have to show everything, but you have to show something. And the Montreal Alouettes are showing nothing right now. No gumption, no fight, no desire to win. They're getting stopped inside the 5 on 3 different occasions. This is not a team playing good football right now. They're not playing sound football. They're not playing complementary football. And I don't think you can easily turn that switch on for the playoffs. I think they really need to take a serious look at themselves, correct what they're doing, get something going in the last week of the regular season, or I think they're at a real risk of doing the opposite of what happened last year, where the team riding high with the first round bye got shellacked by the upstart team that was peaking at the right time. That's the Toronto Argonauts this year in this case, and the Montreal Alouettes just aren't looking like they did early in the season.
I'm not worried about the Alouettes at all because it's different when you have something to play for. And it's also different when you're playing at home with the air horns and all the rest that goes on there. And that will be on display this week against Winnipeg. And might I mention, in the East Final. I do agree that the Toronto Argonauts seem to be peaking at an ideal time in the season. But I'm not worried right now about the Montreal Alouettes. If they come out against Winnipeg and look terrible, then I will have some worry. But this team showed last year that they know how to get it done and make clutch plays when it counts. And until proven otherwise, that is why they are first place in the East Division already and the favorites to win the Grey Cup.
I'm a little worried about the Montreal Alouettes. And my reasoning is this. Cody Fajardo was brilliant during the playoffs last year. He was brilliant to start the season this year. And he has fully regressed to the mean since then. And Davis Alexander, who looked like a wonderkind for part of his stint as a starter earlier this year, looked patently mediocre against a defense in BC that has struggled, right, for a lot of the season. They lost Tyson Philpott, who was sensational to start the year. Yes, Austin Mack didn't dress for this game. He should be back for the playoffs. But I wonder about their firepower, right, offensively. They don't run the ball great anyway. This offense is limited. And if you're in a situation where, you play the Alouettes and you keep the ball, right, you don't turn the ball over and give up that field position, this team looks beatable. And I will give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in this regard. The Toronto Argonauts played 6 meaningless games to end last season. They went 5-1 and then looked like crap in the East Final. That being said, it should be noted that of those 5 wins, the last 4, which came in a row, came against non-playoff teams. They beat Edmonton, Ottawa, Saskatchewan, and Ottawa. Those were the 3 teams that did not make the playoffs last year. So the Argonauts, yes, kept winning going into the playoffs, albeit against bad teams, and then got the doors blown off of them in the postseason. The Alouettes, I'm with Dunk. I want to see how they respond to this loss in Week 21 against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, because if they lose to Winnipeg in one-sided fashion, I think you're almost pressing the panic button heading into the postseason. But we also have no idea what Jason Moss is going to do with his lineup here, right? He could say, yeah, we're resting Cody Fajardo, we're resting Charleston Rambo, we're resting Austin Mack, we're giving the day off to all of our interior offensive linemen. We're going to give, Dylan Wynn, we're going to give Tyrese Beverett, Darnell Sankey the day. Like we don't know what that offense is or that defense is going to look like. They might trot out the exact same lineup they did a week ago. It might be a skeleton crew. So I want to save some judgment for that. But no, this team has not impressed me not even just this past week, it hasn't really impressed me over the last month. And I do think that Owls fans should be not concerned, but I think it should give them something of a pause. I'm in the middle right now. I want to see week 21.
Before we move on, we should just ask the question, or I want to ask the question directly to Jason Moss. What was the point of putting Cody Fajardo in to start this football game when he had not been with your football team in 2 weeks while staying at home after the birth of his second child? Like, to me, as much as, yes, Cody understands the offense and he has the timing and all these things, you don't expect a veteran quarterback to be rusty. Why take that risk at this stage? Why throw your team into the turmoil of having one quarterback start the game and go to another at halftime? Just give Cody another week. Yes, he can be with the team, but staple his butt to the bench, give this one to Davis, and then give Cody the tune-up in the regular season finale. I didn't understand that move. Fajardo looked very bad in that first half against BC. They couldn't get anything going offensively. And frankly, I think it was a poor coaching decision to try and force that in there when, again, he had not practiced with the team in 2 weeks.
Well, and that almost makes me think he's not going to play this upcoming week. Because why force him into the game in BC if you're going to give him reps in week 21? So that almost makes me think Davis Alexander will get the whole game this week, but who knows? And we should mention a big congrats to Cody Fajardo and his wife Laura on welcoming their second child. That's very exciting news for them. But I agree with you, JC. That logic did not make much sense to me, unless the choice is, well, let's give Cody some reps in BC, and that way we can give him 2 full weeks off to prepare for the East Final.
I wish JC Abbott could have been in 2 places at once to take his glasses and mustache and stick it in the face of Jason Moss and ask him this question directly after the game.
I wish I could have been in 2 places at once. I could have tried to run back and forth, but that would have just embarrassed everyone.
That would have been like one of those famous sitcom episodes where somebody tries to attend a party in 2 different places, and then the Flintstones did that. A bunch of other shows.
A different outfit for each press conference, like yakety sacks every time when I'm running back and forth. Yeah, would have been fun.
Yeah, it would have been great.
You're too slow. Let's just be realistic.
He could have borrowed the scooter that Lucky Whitehead probably left in the bowels of BC Place somewhere.
There you go.
The OUA wrapped up its regular season schedule this past weekend, while the rest of U Sports, the AUS, RSEQ, and Canada West, played its second last week of the regular schedule. Which games stood out to you, and which OUA playoff matchup are you most excited for?
I'll start with the second question. I'm most excited for Windsor and Queens. No disrespect to the other 2 matchups, but typically the 2 versus 7 game and the 3 versus 6 game are not super competitive in the OUA. This is the 4 versus 5 game, 2 5-3 football teams. Windsor, a little bit more of a defensive team. Queens, a little bit more of a run-first team. This could be, I think, a really good matchup in the Rose City. I'm excited to see which of these teams wins. And by the way, the Lancers won the first meeting of the season way back in week 1, 25-21. So this should be a close one, should be an exciting one. But the games that stood out to me the most, first of all, congratulations to Riker Frank of the Saskatchewan Huskies becoming the program's all-time leader in career rushing touchdowns. They won 22-20 over the Regina Rams, securing a playoff berth. However, the game of the week had to have been the Manitoba Bisons and Alberta Golden Bears. Alberta led 30-4 late in the third quarter, a 26-point lead. The Manitoba Bisons battled all the way back, tying the game on the last play of regulation with Maya Turner kicking a field goal. And then in overtime, Carter Kettle scores a touchdown for the Golden Bears. On the ensuing drive, Manitoba gets a TD from Braden Stubbs. They go for 2, and A.K. Gasama makes an incredible catch on a fade route from Jackson Tuchinski. Unbelievable play. It's up on my column for Around U Sports this week, the replay of that 2-point game-winning score. Unbelievable. Oh, and one more I'll touch on really quick. Eloa Latondres Regimbald, quarterback of the McGill Redbirds. No, McGill did not knock off Laval, though it was close. But Eloa Latondres Regimbald, from the quarterback position, ran for 108 180 yards. That is unbelievable. And this was, again, a close game. In years past, this is a 50-point blowout. McGill held the lead into the fourth quarter against the Rouge et Or. Kudos to them.
I think you nail which playoff matchup is the most exciting one. I, too, am fired up to see Queens and Windsor go to battle and see how much those dynamics have changed since week one. For me, the game of the week, maybe not the most exciting one, because I agree with you, Hodge, that was out between Manitoba and Alberta. But the UBC Thunderbirds were left for dead after going 0-2 to start the year. They have now won 5 straight games, and Isaiah Knight is a legitimate Heck Crichton Trophy contender. 163 rushing yards in a rain-soaked affair with that atmospheric river hanging over the Lower Mainland. A really impressive defensive performance from UBC as well. I think they are peaking at just the right time. We talk about that in the CFL. I think it applies to U Sports as well, and the Thunderbirds are as dangerous as ever.
JC, I know you hate it, but just to update you on Isaiah Knight's NFL interest, Dallas Cowboys, New York Jets, Cleveland Browns, Philadelphia Eagles, Los Angeles Chargers, Seattle Seahawks, and San Francisco 49ers are now the list of NFL teams that have inquired about Mr. Knight. Wow, the Cowboys, Browns, and Chargers, 3 teams, JC, have been to campus this fall to see him. Unbelievable. He's leading the country in rushing. Are you starting to believe in this kid even a little bit?
I've always been a believer in Isaiah Knight. I still don't think he's going to sign a legitimate NFL contract. I will say that. But if I was an NFL road scout and I had the chance on the company dime to come up and spend a day in Vancouver and take in that beautiful Point Grey campus and watch a little football on the side, justifiably with a guy who may be on the fringes for a rookie minicamp invite, maybe a UDFA contract as an outside shot, the guy absolutely would take it. So I'm not surprised that there's a few scouts taking advantage. I think this is a result of what happened last year with the UBC Pro Day. So many teams came up. So many of them were impressed, not only by the players on the field, but also with the event itself, with the city, with the program and the organization. There were relationships built there. I think you're going to see more NFL teams coming up to UBC over the next number of years as a result of that, even if they don't necessarily have players of the same caliber of Theo Benedette and Giovanni Manu coming down the pipeline.
I admire JC's ability to simultaneously be a UBC homer and hater. Well done.
He is an alumnus, for the record. All right, the game of the week that stood out for me was the Wilfrid Laurier Golden Hawks for 2 reasons. They had their first undefeated regular season campaign, I should say, clinched their first undefeated regular season campaign since 2005 when the Golden Hawks won the Vanier Cup. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. And the other reason is because their outstanding receiver, Ethan, don't call me Michael Jordan, got 1,000 yards receiving spot on. He's the first receiver in Laurier Golden Hawks football history to hit 4 digits receiving. He overtook Curly Gittens Jr., who had the single season program record, for the record. And he became the first receiver in U Sports to go over 1,000 yards receiving since Tyler Ternowski in 2018. It's rarefied air. He's now in the company with names such as Andy Fantus, who has the U Sports all-time receiving record that stands at 1,300 yards, which he accomplished in 2002. Ooh. Unbelievable stuff.
8 games
from
folks.
Mr.
8
Fantus.
Games.
Yes, and I think that needs to be said. 8 games. To get to 1,000 yards, rushing or receiving in U Sports football in 8 regular season games or less, if you have some nicks and bruises, is unbelievable. So shout out to Ethan Jordan. Taylor Elgersma, obviously his outstanding quarterback that we've talked a lot about, finished his season with yet another bang, led the country in passing yards and passing touchdowns, and is the outstanding favorite to win the Heck Crichton Player Award. Fellas, The OUA playoff matchup to be most excited about is obvious, is it not?
Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. I was waiting for this. Let's get it over.
I didn't even write the rundown.
I know. I know.
And you put excited in there.
I know. I know.
Okay, I'm just saying. It is the University of Guelph Griffins hosting a home playoff game for the first time since pre-pandemic. Yes, it was 2019, the last time the Griffins played at home. Full credit to head coach Mark Soria for getting it done 6-2 in the regular season. I also think Matt Berry, the defensive coordinator, has had a major impact with this team. And Corey Mace is even cheering for the University of Guelph Griffins because his brother Javon Jacobson is there playing postseason football. The Griffins, I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb here, but I believe are going to win, and it's going to create some intriguing matchups in the OUA semifinal round because Guelph played Laurier tight. That said, the Griffins did not have Western on their regular season schedule. It's going to be intriguing as we go along in Ontario. See, boys, it wasn't even that long.
It wasn't that long. That was pretty good. It's now time for Hodge's Heritage Moment. On this day in 2006, Warren Keane set a new U Sports record when he made 9 field goals against St. Mary's. Despite holding an all-time record, the Concordia product is best remembered for being drafted number 2 overall by Edmonton in the 2007 CFL draft, a decision that sent shockwaves across the league. Keane would go on to dress for only 3 professional games, connecting on 6 of 9 field goal attempts. Players taken after Keane include Chris Van Zyl, Donovan Alexander, Calvin McCarty, Chris Getzlaff, and current Saskatchewan Roughriders head coach, Corey Mace. JC, and we'll start with JC, then we'll go to Justin. Do either of you know who the GM was of Edmonton at this time?
Is this still Danny Machocha era?
This was the first draft pick that Danny Machocha made as a CFL head coach.
Oh.
And with respect to Machocha, who is a reigning Grey Cup champion GM, I'll just say this. It's a good thing he got better at making picks.
This is a and I don't like to talk about necessarily busts because I know there's a lot of things that go into it from a personal side, and guys get unlucky with injury, and we don't know all the details always. But if there was ever a pick you can call a bust, it's taking a kicker 2nd overall who only plays 3 games. What were they thinking? With all due respect to Warren Keane, you'd never touch a kicker this high. Most of the time, you don't even have to draft the kicker. The best ones end up going undrafted, and you can pick them up afterwards. There's no reason to reach on a guy like this.
JC, it is the CFL draft where this does happen because at the time there were no global kickers that have overtaken the league. My boy Rob Maver, who was a kicker and punter with me at the University of Guelph,
there's one global
was selected,
kicker.
I believe 5th overall.
One global kicker, Doug. There's a lot of global punters. A lot of global punters.
Sorry.
One
Punters,
global kicker.
Punters.
I've never talked with Danny Machocha about this pick, but if I remember correctly, the way that this happened essentially was Chris Bauman out of Regina was the first overall pick receiver to the Tiger Cats, and for weeks leading up to the draft, the then Eskimos, now Elks, had decided that Chris Bauman was going to be their pick at number 2 overall. I've talked to Chris Bauman about this. The Ticats didn't interview him at the Combine. I don't think really showed any interest in him whatsoever. And then suddenly the day before the draft, they were like, yep, we're taking you. And I think that threw Edmonton for a massive loop. And suddenly they panicked and went, okay, who the heck are we taking? We were banking on getting Chris Bauman at 2nd overall. So I think that was part of the equation, but this is also 17 years ago now. And I was not covering the CFL in 2007 because I was still pretty busy with high school. So that I think is how it happened, but it was certainly a weird one, even by CFL draft standards.
Let's go to the 3-minute drill. Regular season attendance in Toronto went up 5.7% at BMO Field this year. Should local fans be excited?
I think they should, right? This is another increase for the Toronto Argonauts, and it's an increase that I think is sustainable, right? They're showing sustainable growth. Now, their attendance is still by far the lowest in the league, but I think that, that's a trend they were never going to reverse in a year. The fact that they've grown now again, it should be celebrated. The Argonauts signed NCAA Division III standout Tucker Horn to a futures contract. Do you think he'll be a starting CFL quarterback one day?
I'm not going to go that far, but I know our contributor Ben Grant certainly liked his tape when he dived into it. And it should be noted, this is a guy who most recently played some indoor football. The Argos have had recent success with taking guys out of the indoor football leagues, notably at the quarterback position. Cameron Dukes came out of that league and, of course, became a guy who they could rely upon to start, albeit not a starter, but somebody who could spot start for them and a very reliable backup. Canadian quarterback Curtis Rourke had a brilliant performance in Indiana's win over Nebraska, but suffered a thumb injury that will keep him out indefinitely. Does that mean his Heisman hopes are done?
Probably, man. A lot of the Heisman talk and hype and hoopla and eventually who gets the award is stat based. Not to say that he couldn't get in the race. If he only misses one game against Washington, which is what it seems like it could be, we'll see if he misses more, then there's a possibility because he's looked great with Indiana. But when you talk about what Ashton Jeanty is doing at Boise State or Travis Hunter in Colorado and some of the other big-time players in the SEC or the Big Ten, it seems like it would be an uphill battle for him, but his numbers were right there among the best quarterbacks in the country. So if he only misses one game, there's still a chance. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers brought back veteran defensive back Nick Taylor. Is that a smart move?
With Brandon Alexander possibly being out for the rest of the season, I think bringing back a guy who's been there, done that, and knows their system really well is smart, but I'm not sure Nick Taylor at age 36 is a guy you want starting a game. So I like it as a depth move. Have him in the room. Not sure you want him on the field. Super involved. The Calgary Stampeders clinched the first overall pick in the 2025 CFL draft with the team's loss to Hamilton. Will the Stamps use it on Curtis Rourke?
Oh, that's going to be a fascinating conversation of how high Rourke gets selected. It's going to be influenced a lot by where he goes in the NFL draft and what his opportunity south of the border looks like. But with the value of the quarterback, even if he's picked on day 3, maybe even day 2, do you still take him in the first round because of that value if he eventually comes up? Potentially, I don't think it's going to be first overall, though, because the Calgary Stampeders are desperate for talent right now. I don't think they can wait around as long as maybe some other teams can for a player like Curtis Rourke. The Hamilton Tiger Cats are retiring Garney Henley's number 26 jersey. Is that a smart move by the franchise?
Yes, it should have been done a long time ago.
50 years.
Ryan Reynolds. That's what I'm saying, man. Come on. Ryan Reynolds trolled the Kelsey brothers on their New Heights podcast by calling Canadian football the superior sport compared to American football. Was that a good one?
I do think it was a good one. And something really interesting that came of this article that we did was we got an email from a Ticats fan named Paul Dubrowski. I hope I'm saying that right. He sent us a picture of Jason and Travis Kelsey attending a game at Tim Hortons Field from 2019. This was the opening game of the season, which became infamous for one reason, which is that they came up to watch Zach Collaros, who took a vicious headshot from Jeremiah Masoli on the first play of the game.
From Simone Lawrence.
From Simone Lawrence. So I'm surprised.
You said Jeremiah Masoli, bro.
Oh, my bad. No, Zach Collaros took a vicious headshot from Simone Lawrence. My apologies. And I'm surprised that the Kelsey brothers didn't jump the fence and run on the field and try to hurt Simone. Like they came all the way up from, I know they're originally from Ohio. I believe
Heights.
I think Jason has made his permanent home in Philly. I think Travis lives in or near Kansas City.
How do we not know the Kelsey brothers were at the game? Were you bearing the lead here? Like the league and the Ticats and everybody involved could have plastered that all over.
Exactly.
Maybe the Kelsey brothers wanted to keep it under the radar.
And maybe they just got tickets quietly from Zach. And also, let's remember, they weren't like social media famous in 2019. They were just two NFL
still the Kelsey
players.
brothers.
They were, but they weren't.
I believe all pros by that time.
Yeah, but one was playing on the offensive line, and the other was playing for a Chiefs team that was like looking to break through. They weren't the stars they were today.
Neither was dating Taylor Swift at the time.
And neither was dating Taylor Swift at the time. But shout
They were
out
in
to Paul.
Chunky Campbell's soup commercial. Sorry, Campbell's soup commercial with their mom. No, that would
No,
come after the
that's
Super Bowl.
No,
came long after.
We're talking
This
about the
is pre-
summer. We're talking about like early summer 2019. So shout out
This
to
is
Paul
catching
for the
Kelsey
photo. And by the way,
Catching
in the
Kelsey.
yes, and by the way, in this email that I got, I looked at the pictures, and they're not terribly like they're not dressed from head to toe in NFL garb. Like they do pass for like they're both wearing just neutral colors. They could very easily be just two abnormally large Tiger Cats fans at a game. Like they're not dressed in a way that would tip anybody off that they were NFL stars. But shout out to Paul for the picture. We now have confirmation that the Kelsey brothers have in fact come up to see their former teammate and roommate Zach Collaros play in the CFL. It just would have been nice if it was a better game where Jeremiah Masoli and or Simone Lawrence took his head off on the first play from scrimmage to start the year.
If the Kelsey brothers want us to help them take their podcast to new heights in Canada, give us a shout. Happy to do it. Open invitation to the 3DownNation podcast anytime.
On that note, we thank you as always for listening to our show. He's Justin Dunk. He's JC Abbott. I'm John Hodge. We'll see you later this week for our picks for week 21. I'm 7-0, by the way, on a hot streak. Come back for that. We'll see you then. Have a great rest of the week.